Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. I wanted to let y'all know our online bit course is about to be starting another masterclass here in around a month, right at the first part of February. So if you haven't gotten on that newsletter list, it's thebitcourse.com. We'll have a link in the description. The masterclass is the crown jewel of bit knowledge out there. Some people might think it's about bit fitting. It's way more than simple bit fitting. We start with anatomy and physiology. We talk about how to use your hands properly, which is something I'm real proud of in the course, because any tool is up to the animator of the tool how successful or unsuccessful it's going to be. We talk about how to fit them, weight, all sorts of things there. We get specific into snaffles, curb bits, so it does have the physics and the mechanics stuff, but a lot of anatomy, physiology, body language, talking about the various stages of training where this bit would be appropriate for this task, this would not be. You're in deep water here, you're safe with this one. A lot of real practical information in this course. The masterclass version, which we'll be starting, that's going to be 7 weeks with me. So you'll get a module every week. You'll go over that module later that week. We're going to have a live Zoom meeting with all the people in that particular group. And then you can ask me questions. We're going to go over the 70-page study guide. So each module has a chunk of study guide that goes with it. We'll answer all those questions, and then you can pick my brain further. Those classes have been lasting 2 hours, a little more than 2 hours each. So just to give you an idea, in that 7 weeks, you'll have about a 30-hour commitment. So there's a lot of information here, which is the pro and the con of it. If you're not real serious about this, it's probably not for you. If you're a pro, you absolutely need to be in this. And it's going to have information that is relevant to pros and amateurs alike. It's not discipline specific. We're going to talk about snaffles, double bridles, spade bits, pretty much the whole gambit of what might be out there. We're all riding horses, and there's fewer differences between our different bits and all than we might think. So we're looking at things from a functional standpoint. It's not about history or value or any of that kind of stuff. It's purely about function and practical use. Going through the masterclass course also allows you to become certified as a bidding consultant through me. And so at the end of that, if you are interested in adding that to your repertoire of offerings in a professional way, you can take a test and then have a kind of a question and answer private Zoom call with me to pick your brain a little bit further, and then you can become certified and add that to your repertoire of skills. So I would really advise you to check it out, at least get on the newsletter list. We send out a lot of good videos and things exclusively to that list, so you can learn for free and then see if it's for you. So check it out, the bitcourse.com masterclass, starting this February 2025.
We've got a returning guest this morning with Mr. Josh Nichol from Alberta, Canada. Josh has been on the podcast before, so I'm not going to go into a huge introduction for him, but he owns, along with his wife, his business, Josh Nichol Relational Horsemanship. He is all about the getting in there and developing that relationship with your horse, and a very fine horseman, a fast talker, a very verbal sort of a guy, and one of the nicest dudes you're ever going to meet. Josh, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Good to be back. Always enjoy hanging out with you.
Absolutely, man. I did a webcast for you here 6 months ago or so that we hadn't had contact since then, really. But it is always a pleasure to get to chat with you and everything. Well, we've got some new questions, but we're gonna run you through the lightning round questions. And remember, these are for points, so you want to be on your A game with these.
Okay.
If you were a Jedi, what % chance is there that you would misuse the Force?
Ooh. What % chance? Oh man. If I was a Jedi, so that means I'm trained and I've done all the work.
Full use of the Force.
Full use. Wow. Would I misuse it? I'll say 80%.
All right. That's fair. Morning or evening?
Morning.
Like, are you a early morning guy or
I
4
like to be
a.m. or something?
not
So
4 a.m.
not 4 a.m.
No.
So how do you handle it? You're far enough north, I'm sure that y'all really don't have that many daylight hours this time of year. So is it weird to
Mhm.
you to get up and have 4 hours of darkness afterwards, or does it not work out like that, or what?
I love it because it's my productive time. When I get up, if I have things to do, getting up before everybody else is when I like to roll because I can. When it's dark still, you're not even distracted by what's happening out your window. So it doesn't make you feel like you should be getting out there doing chores or you can kind of get to work and do your thing. And yeah, I'm a morning guy. I don't know,
Uh,
5:36. That's when I'm when I'm
Fair enough.
when I'm dialed in and working on something. That's my time.
How long do you dunk a cookie in milk?
Ugh. Well, I would say I really like a soft cookie anyways. So if you have to dunk a cookie in to milk for too long, then you shouldn't be eating that cookie.
I'm there with you. I don't understand hard dry pastries like
Oh,
biscotti and that kind of stuff. Like yeah, I want like a gooey chocolate chip cookie, where
yes,
the
sir.
middle, where you can hold it up and the middle sinks down.
Yep,
Like looks like a black hole. That's the way it's supposed to be.
I
Absolutely.
agree. My daughter's made it an art to make cookies I like. And that's right. It's kind of like cookie dough, but the outside has just started to harden, but it's soft. Agreed.
What skill or technique do you not have with a horse that you admire in someone else and wish you did have?
How to not lean in my team roping.
How to not lean?
How to not lean. I'm just working at getting better on my heel inside, and for the darndest time, I want to just drop my shoulder and lean over, and I trying to fix it, but haven't quite got there yet when it's quick.
Grab those feet with your hand instead of the rope, huh?
That's right. Yep.
What is the most important quality of a horseman or horsewoman?
Hmm. Well, dang, that's a big one. Uh, maybe I don't know if this is the right word for it, but the empathy that comes with experience that allows you to see the whole picture. Um, when I watch the really good horsemen that are, really handy with a horse and that they really understand how the big picture comes together. Um, I guess they lack that overcritical edge because of the experience they have to recognize how hard it is to get there and how much work it takes. And there's an empathy for the horses and for people that I sometimes see a little missing. It's easy to get super critical with others and with the horses because you maybe don't have enough experience to recognize that how much time it takes and how many ways you got to come at things to really get a person and a horse developed. Um, yeah, I don't know if that is exactly an answer, but that's the because with that empathy comes experience, and with that experience has come a certain level of success in developing horses, and so you can kind of feel in a person how many horses they've developed by the way they present themselves, by the way they talk, by the way they handle others. Because, when you've done it enough, you recognize how hard it is. You recognize how much it takes, and there's a lot of mistakes along the way. And then you just handle horses and others a little differently because you kind of have all that already in your own experience bank. So you can really tell the difference between somebody who's done a heck of a lot of work and someone who's just trying to, and not that that's a bad thing, but that to me is a sign of a good horseman because they've just got that different level of they have a different filter or a different lens they look through because of all that experience and success.
So let me ask you kind of a follow-up question on that. And I didn't mean to get that deep in this one, but I think I'll forget this point if I don't do it right now. So, do you ever find yourself in a position or see in others where there can be too much empathy? In other words,
Mm,
like if I sit here and just hug this, I could do
Yeah.
that for 6 hours and make no progress, or I could push a
Mm.
little bit and kind of rip the Band-Aid off, and then we're going to heal from that in 3 minutes, and then we'll actually make some progress and kind of get past this. So do you?
Yeah.
It's kind of a
Yeah, I think
pendulum
that's
sort of
a
a thing, right?
yeah. I think that's the culture right now in the horse world is that, there's this sense that we went way too far in being strong and dominant and I feel like there's also a time in this world where, it's not just about not dying anymore. We're not post-war anymore. And, we don't live in kind of a sense of space where you can't think about your feelings anymore, and I really feel like that's cultured in an environment where we really want to connect and be with our horses and have good relationships. And so the cultivation of that has kind of promoted a desire. And, I talk, my deal is relational horsemanship, but what that means is what does it mean to be in relationship with things? That could be bits, and it could be a spur. It could be, anything. Lope in a circle, nice. It's not really about just standing there with our horses as much as that is part of it. And I find that because there's been this missing link for so long, there's this great craving to always believe that going there is going to be the answer. Just kind of like going back and calming things down, and sometimes that's not what it means to be in relationship with the moment. But because it's become such a prevalent conversation, like anything, we talked about politics early before we started there, that everything swings, and it's swinging that brings things to balance. And that's kind of my heart. I often feel like the term relational horsemanship can be misinterpreted, because it sounds like that's what we're going to maybe do is just hang out, but my goal is to develop, really great working relationships. When I look at the relationship that my wife and I have, you know, um, that it's not developed deeper by us just sitting on the couch, and doing nothing. It's developed by us going through the fire together, but having a certain relationship in the process that fire is honing and the challenges are honing. So being able to kind of have relationship with that space is to me what makes all the difference. So yeah, I think that that's kind of what I'm trying. I feel like that's what I try to promote the most. We're developing performance horses, and we're out there, doing the things, and in the process doing my best to retain and connect and take care of those pieces. But you get a sailor doesn't get sea legs by staying in the harbor. And I feel like that's maybe a piece we might be missing a little bit on developing, you know, those solid, deep, experienced horses. When I go into my pen and I'm gonna pick one, if we got to go and rope a soggy cow or something, I know the ones I'm gonna pick and the ones that have been there, they've been there and they know they got that experience, and those are the deep ones, man. Those are the ones anybody'd want to get on, and because they just take care of you, so it's kind of like that balance. And I really do feel like that is a swing in the culture. And slowly what'll end up happening is those horses that become too cultured by doing less will become, if we're not careful, they can become the ones that don't know what to do when things get harder.
Mhm. Yep. Raise them to be dependent rather than independent
Yeah,
sometimes. Absolutely.
that's right.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you back a trailer, Josh Nichol?
Well, I've done it quite a bit. I don't know. Scale 1 to 10. Our driveway is uphill and twists a bit, and the girls drive it down, and then I back it out. And you know, I don't know. I'd say it's a pretty good skill of mine. Um, Shoot, things can always get better, but I'd say 80%, eight. Let's say eight.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Bay or sorrel,
Oh, dang. Man.
or any other? What's your
hmm
favorite color?
What's my favorite color? I like pretty bay. Ridden some pretty nice sorrel horses. It's funny for me. I find that the horse makes me like the color. Uh, had a couple really good sorrel horses. Had a couple neat grays. Hmm. Always wanted a blue. I've never had a blue Ronin. I've always thought that I really seen a couple just good. Friend of mine has a beautiful heel horse, and he's a blue, and man, he's just such a cool looking horse, you know. But
Mm.
so I don't get drawn too much to color. I find that the mind makes me like the color, you know, when they're just good. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I have to say, it's one of the, I have nowhere near the preference I had when I was 17 or
yeah,
something like that. It doesn't,
mhm.
doesn't matter
Hard,
much to me.
yeah, hard not to love a good one, you know, when they're good and they're gonna be there for you. It's like you just start liking everything about them because you know they're gonna have your back.
Yeah, I I'm a- this is one of my favorite things. My dad and I didn't ever have a whole lot of talks about women or anything, but one day we were going hunting or something. I could show you the exact place we were on a gravel road, exactly where we were when he said this. It's probably the only advice about women that he ever gave me, but I think it applies here. He
Yeah.
said, if you're ever driving down a back road like this and you come across a beautiful woman on the side of the road, do not stop and pick her up because someone left her there for a damn good reason. It's kind of the pretty horse thing, right?
That's right.
I would
Right.
way rather the one I can get along with than the one that's gorgeous standing there, but maybe
Hmm.
someone got rid of it for a damn good reason. Oh,
Yeah, I remember I did a clinic one time and a gal came and she had this the ugliest jug-headed horse I've ever seen. You know, he was put together with all a whole bunch of different parts, kind of like Johnny Cash song. Um, and she brought him in, and I'll just make it short, but you know, she brought him in and she just said, you know, I'd really love for you to ride him and let me see what you think. And okay, no problem. So worked him a bit, and he's just good. You know, hard to look at, but just good. I ended up saddling him and put his bridle on and worked him in the round pen, got on him loping circles, and she said, and, you know, she all of a sudden she says, "Dang, that I just can't believe that that's his first time he's ever been ridden." And you know, she didn't tell me a thing. I just by the time I was done, I was loping circles, and I just have never had a horse be that good about everything you ask without even tense consideration. You know, and so kind of learned a few things about talking to people a little more after that, but you know,
was she a life insurance agent by
yeah,
chance or
that's right.
anything like that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But I thought that was funny because he was the ugliest horse I'd ever seen and probably the best minded I've ever, you know, just so open without any tension. He's just yeah, you know, just yes, sir, and you know, no problems at all.
So that inspires me to tell another story here. When I was in college, I was working for a cutting horse trainer named Mark Cooey, and all I was doing was breaking colts. Like, I mean, he was just, new set of colts every week or two, and just I had
Mm.
basically the first 2 weeks, and so his father-in-law brings a horse, little bay stud, 3-year-old. What I'm told is never been handled or anything like that. Back the trailer up to the round pen, open the doors, that kind of deal. So I get in there, and sure enough, he's pretty snotty. It takes me quite a while to get a rope and a halter on him and all of that stuff. And he starts settling down. And I do everything, and it comes time to saddle him. And normally, by the time I've done all that, saddling is kind of just a foregone conclusion. It just
Mm.
takes 2 or 3 minutes. And it took me like an hour to get the
Mm.
saddle on this horse.
Mm.
And I wound up snubbing him to the side of the round pen and just
Mm.
saddling him. And
Mm.
and it was pretty ugly. And don't judge, I'm like 20 at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um so it was just kind of, it was going on him one way or another. And I get done saddling him and I turn him loose, and I mean he bucks like hell, feet straight up in there and all that stuff. And he finally settles down and is just dripping sweat over there, panting in the corner. And about this time, Mark's father-in-law, who'd been watching me this whole time, says, Newman didn't have near that much trouble saddling him. And I went, what? You told me this horse had never been handled. Well, he never had a halter on him. It turned out what they had done was took him to some rodeo grounds. And this is his friend Newman, who knows lots about horses. They put him in the bucket chutes, saddled him, tied a gunny sack of Coke cans to the saddle horn, and then opened the gate and let her buck. And then he tells me the whole story. That horse bucked for like an hour and a half, and then finally just laid out, absolutely exhausted. And they run him back through the chutes to get the saddle off of him and all of that stuff. And then they brought him to me the next day. And so,
It's got him
man,
primed
this
up for you.
Yeah, the stuff people won't tell you about a
Yeah.
horse and put you like,
Mhm.
it just shocks me how many times someone's like, you didn't think, maybe I could die and that would have
Yeah,
been a good
right,
piece of
right.
information to give me,
Would have been helpful.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
I don't think so.
What's your favorite pizza topping?
Meat.
Meat? Do y'all
Hmm.
ever do? I know bison is big in your part of the world. Do y'all ever do like bison salami or stuff like that and get exotic with it, or just pretty straightforward?
Yeah, I'm pretty straightforward. Yeah, no, I've never done that before. Sausage, pepperoni, bacon. Hmm.
Is that Canadian bacon or bacon bacon?
Regular bacon.
What is your horse industry related pet peeve?
Judgment.
Okay.
Yeah, judgment and value-based opinions. Like, I've put all my value into this kind of concept, so it's hard to have a conversation because when you have a difference of opinion, it makes me feel less valuable about what I'm doing, and just the judgment that's there instead of just do your thing. And um people that are, you know, their 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 approach is based on what they don't want to do and what they don't like others doing, and that it's just do your thing. Show me what you do. I don't want to hear what you don't like. I just want to see you do what you're doing. And I don't care to have conversations about others that, that it's an insecurity, and it seems so prevalent in the horse industry, um, in the horsemanship industry for certain. Just seems like everybody's got to get tribal and camp out in a space and got to get after things they don't like. And yeah, that's a big one for me.
Would you say that there kind of is a place? So I guess you're saying more judgment toward people, but would you say that judgment is also an important quality? Like you may, for instance, I don't know if you ever done this, but sometimes you have to fire a customer. Like, hey, the
Oh
way
yeah.
you're acting around my barn and my family is
Hmm.
just like we're not doing that again, and so I'm sorry,
Hmm.
but you got to go and don't come back, kind of thing, or
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
That to me is a boundary. Like you're just helping people get to know you better, and you're allowing yourself to show up in a moment. Um, and to me, that's boundaries. I look at judgment as something you're doing, something you're existing in that is causing you to focus on what you don't like about someone else, rather than just showing just as a cowboy thing. I see this all the time in the cowboy world, especially the rodeo world. Nobody cares what you're riding or how you're doing it. And maybe that's rodeo because it's all about time. But there's very little judgment. And it's that's been my experience. But in the places where, you know, there's there's this focus on the horsemanship, and there's not a lot that's being done with it. Like we're not the horsemanship is to get horses to a good place, and then we're going out trail riding, and not that those things are bad, but it gets us so focused on the approach rather than the thing we're doing with it. um and yeah, just that'd be the biggest thing for me. It makes me sad, actually, because I feel like there's so much opportunity for camaraderie. We can all learn so much from each other, and just because I'm doing it different, it doesn't even matter at all. That's actually a good thing. Then we can come together, and I've thought that it'd be fun for you and I to ride together sometime and just swap ideas and go and do a job, and have some fun. Um, but that would be it. I feel like that holds the industry back tremendously, tremendously. And then pat like it kind of slides into judgment, and then passive aggression would be the approach of the softer side. It's like it's not open. It's just these slighted comments about doing this or doing that, and it just makes me sad.
Yeah, I think that's just human nature, though.
Yeah,
You'll see that just about everywhere. But um,
sure.
I would certainly agree that life's too short for me if I'm not going to get into those kind of conversations, or
Hmm.
I'll leave that Facebook group in a heartbeat or
Yeah,
whatever. I don't need more drama in my life.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What is your least favorite barn chore?
Least favorite barn chore. Well, we water our arena, our indoor arena. We water it. I bring up, we have a big tank that we bring the water in, and then there's this hose, and we unroll this hose. It's a kind of a fire hose that we unroll it, and then after you've watered the arena, the hose is full of sand, and then you have to drag that sucker out onto the lawn, and we wipe it around, and then you got to roll it up again. And for some reason, I just can't stand doing that job. I hate rolling that hose up. I think about it every time, and I just have to take a breath, and I just gotta do the things. You can't put too much thought into it, but I sure don't like it.
I
But
know
yeah,
exactly where you're coming from. I worked at a barn that had a fire hose like that too, and I used to love water in the arena, but God, I
yeah,
hated putting that hose up. I know
yeah,
exactly what you mean. You need to go
mixing everything.
strip down and take a shower when you're done with that because
Yep.
you're gonna have sand in every crack you can have sand in. Yeah. What's your favorite barn chore?
Oh, probably sweeping.
Sweeping?
I like cleaning the barn. It's good. It's a time when you've kind of concluded everything. Your horses are out, or everything's put away, and you're just, finishing. When you finish the barn and everything's swept and cleaned, and you're reset for the morning, there's a sense of conclusion, but it's also kind of meditative where you just get to kind of check out a little bit, and you got a purpose. It's a little bit like fishing to me. You've got a purpose, but you're uh, somewhat able to really spend time in your own thoughts.
I do like a lot of tasks like that. Sweeping, I wouldn't say would be one of mine, but oddly, mopping is.
Mm.
I had a job briefly at a country club when I was in high school, and I would have to mop the big room after parties and stuff. And, people would spill tea or whatever. And
Yeah, yeah,
man, I could that was before I didn't even have a Walkman. I was just actually alone with my thoughts, no music, no nothing. And dude, I could mop for 2 hours and just be
yeah, yeah,
perfectly fine. Yep.
yeah, yeah. Some something that feels productive about it too when you're watching it change, and yeah, I don't know.
Do you have any favorite words of wisdom?
Hmm. Favorite words of wisdom. Oh man. Hmm. Hmm. Obviously nothing that's coming to me real fast. Um,
That's okay. But I mean,
uh,
anything you reference back to a favorite author quote or a Bible verse or any kind of a thing that just
mhm.
you kind of pull out your pocket and remind yourself this every once in a while.
Yeah, well, I guess it's more of a poem, but the man in the arena is just the idea of that, of being able to recognize that, the ones in the arena are the ones in the arena that have dirt on their face, and are
Hmm.
doing the work, are the ones that you want to be able to take influence from, and be around. And the ones in the cheap seats always have lots of opinions, but those the ones that are don't worry about the opinions of those that are sitting in the cheap seats. But to get your thoughts and opinions from those that are doing it, you'll generally get a whole different line of support or guidance from those people. And I think that's hard in our culture because there there's way less experience and way more opinions, and that's a big challenge for our industry. And I
Yeah.
because it's easy to have opinions when you're not measuring them, and you're not testing them, and you're not letting the horses put those to the test in a working environment. The less you're doing, the more opinions hold weight. So for me, I really try to culture my the input that I get from others based on the space they're coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not all opinions weigh the same. That's for sure.
there.
That kind of also ties in with the judgment thing you were talking about
Mhm.
earlier too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
Oh, I just I just thought of that. I really like peanut butter and honey guy. That's my deal. I love honey. Um, and my wife normally it's smooth, and then she bought some crunchy stuff, and I thought that was pretty darn good. But I'd say smooth probably, but I enjoy both.
I'm a beekeeper. I don't know if you knew that about me, but
No, I
I
did
always
not.
like it when people talk about having liking honey and all
Yeah,
that stuff. Man, they're
I think I
endlessly fascinating. They really are.
yeah, yeah.
No.
I think I partly exist on honey. People say we're made up of water. I think I'm made up of honey. I love it.
It's a perfect food. It will not spoil. It'll literally last thousands of years. And for whatever reason, the only food we don't need any kind of preservation with, it's the most faked food product on the planet.
Hmm,
If you buy
really?
honey, there's a real good chance it's not actually honey. It's corn syrup or flavoring or,
Hmm,
they
really?
fake it all the time.
Yeah.
So buy from a local beekeeper where you can see his bees.
Yeah, right.
Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
Oh, unexpected about me. I like all kinds of music. I love music. I'm not in any kind of linear musical style. A lot of people would look at me and think, oh yeah, he likes old country or this or that. I love art. I love anybody. So I think, man, some singers, there's singers in every genre of music that are just such artists, and I love hearing art. I like going to art galleries. I love seeing anybody who is doing anything at a very deep level and has a depth of competency and experience. I love it. So,
So
yeah.
I've been, you know how you sometimes you get down a rabbit hole on YouTube. I have recently been watching these videos by a company called Drumeo, which I believe is Canadian, and they
Hmm.
take a famous drummer and then they put them in a room with their kit and all, and they play them a song without the drum track, but it's from a totally different. So they'll take a heavy metal drummer and play a pop
Yeah.
song, and he's never
Wow.
heard it, but it's a very popular. The rest of the world has heard it, and then they have to figure out and then lay their drums in there. So if you watch one, go watch this is Chad Smith from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the guy that looks like Will Ferrell. They
Yep.
play a song. He had no idea what it was. He listens about 30 seconds in, and then he just full send, baby. I mean, he jumped trying to play the rest. Didn't even listen to it once to know what he just went with it, and it was awesome.
Wow.
It's better than the original, and that's
Wow.
kind of like you're just watching somebody in their lane. They know what
Yeah.
they're doing, even though they're
Yeah.
not familiar with it. I mean, he just nailed it. It's super cool to
Yeah.
see that.
That gets me charged. I think about just the universal flow of things, and when you can just feel into that with somebody, when you have a certain level of competency in something, you kind of know what it means to be in the flow, and then you can get with others when they're there, and man, it'll bring tears to my eyes. I just love being able to jump in to that lane with somebody else doing it and something else. I know I can't maybe do it with my physical body, but I can be there with them, and I just love. I don't know. I love that. Um, yeah,
One of the good parts of humanity, how we can unite through stuff like that, huh?
sure, you betcha. Yeah, you watch a movie about something like that, and all of a sudden you see somebody. You watch a movie about baseball, and all of a sudden, they do something cool, and then you want to maybe pick up a baseball and start. It's inspiring and it's deepening. There's something so beautiful. That to me is the opposite of judgment. Is if we could do that more with each other, is inspire each other to grow and have each other's backs and not be in that guarded weakness, but yet, to be able to jump into that with each other. I just wonder what we would all be able to achieve if that was the level of connection we had.
So I have a thought on that. That to me, it's kind of this is the way I characterize it, but I'm a dirty old man. I it's like the revelation of a badass.
Hmm.
Like you could see this 16-year-old kid that is just, hunched over shoulders, no confidence. And then you put him on a table with these cups and he goes to stacking cups and he can just blow through that like faster than and you're
Yeah.
just like, holy crap, that kid's a badass. You have one of those moments
Yep.
where, oh yeah, all right. And so that's one of those, yeah, kind of deals for me is that's what I always, if I ever have that revelation, like, holy crap, they're a badass, then that's when you're like pumped and on their side.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, anyway.
I just think there's something different about anybody generally that has dialed in on some kind of skill like that. Again, it comes down to that. They just know what it takes. They know what it takes to put effort in, and they'll generally appreciate somebody else doing something like that too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thoughts or feelings? I know I asked you that
Ooh,
before, but are you
yeah.
more the emotional guy or the cerebral guy? What would you say?
It's hilarious for me, maybe it is what's helped me develop what I'm doing, but I feel like I'm really both. Um, I I'm a really sensitive feeling guy, but I'm also a scientist. I spent 6 years in university getting my because I'm very intrigued by how things are, and I also feel like that's what's caused me maybe not to get lost on the feeling side of things with the horsemanship because I'm always trying to quantify it as well. That's a big energy thing for me. That's a beautiful thing about horses is there's such feedback. The feedback loop energetically, you can say whatever you like, you can have opinions. The horses will test you, you can test your ideas through the horses because they give you feedback so quickly. So I love quantifiable data. I love the scientific method. I love being able to test my ideas. I'm going to be the most critical about my own ideas. I don't like to sit in ideas that don't carry weight and don't hold water. Um, so I don't know. I feel like I try to be a pretty good mix. Obviously, in any one moment, it's easy to kind of get off your track, but I usually feel like, my feel will draw my logic into balance, and my balance or my logic will draw my feel into balance. I hope that I would say I'm kind of a mix of those two.
I would agree with you. Yeah, I think I've had some people on here that are clearly feelings, and then they say thoughts, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But no, you're a good mix of the two for sure.
I try to be. I try to be, and I feel like that's kind of in me to be that way. Yeah.
What would you have been professionally if not for Horseman?
Oh, good question. Well, I went to university to develop a consulting business. In where we're located here in Alberta. Oil and gas is a big deal, and logging's a big deal. We're very resource based, and I developed a consulting business with kind of an environmental consulting business. That was going to be my deal. Finished that, went to the mill. I had a job at the mill and started entering data, and stayed for a couple months of that, and then I just started training horses. Um, I actually left that and I went just started a cowboying job at a ranch I'd worked for before, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit at a desk that much, and yeah, so I at that stage in my life was probably a good time to make those decisions because I wasn't locked into having a whole bunch of expense. Cindy and I just got married, and we kind of had the freedom to decide, and so I started cowboying, and then I started training horses, and yeah, that was the beginning of it all.
Do you find it ironic that the more successful and developed you become as a horseman, that you then have to spend that much more time behind a computer again?
Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's a bit of a cultural thing now too. The climate is so much more online. Um, and I know for my own balance, I agree with you. I think it has, and I think it's important that we keep that balance for ourselves because uh, it's easy to get away from being on the ground. And I think like any corporate structure, the farther you are away from the boots on the ground, the less connected you stay to the essence of what it's all about. So I don't know. I love it. My daughter, she's a super competitive barrel racer, and she went to barrel racing last night, and last night Monday, yeah, and she has 3 horses that she's running at this deal. So you know how it is when you bring more than one horse to a show, and we do it kind of do it together, and I just love it. I love the warming them up and getting a feel of them and just staying connected. So for me, I need to stay connected, but I do feel the world pulling me more to the computer. Um, and yeah, that's a juggling act for sure.
Absolutely. Do you ever find it, this is totally off the cuff, but I don't play with horses so much for enjoyment anymore. I'm kind of always working. There's some agenda
Yeah.
or something behind it. And so I really have to kind of mindfully go, I just need to go get the old man out of the pasture and just chill with the horse for a little while I need to give myself a 2 hour window of permission
Yeah.
to not do anything, just enjoy myself with the horse. You ever do that, or do you have that same problem?
Yeah, I think seasons have been like that. I I feel like just with the kids, I've had a real awakening about the passing of time. Had a couple good horses that really got me with that, where they've come and gone, and then and sold a few that maybe I wish I wouldn't have. But you know how life goes, and you need to make living, and you need to put food on the table, and um, I've ended up being able to look back at those moments and say, man, I don't want to miss those moments. And then just watching, my kids are 17, 15, and 13 now, and you see that I just can't believe it. I just remember just a moment ago I was holding that little girl, and now she's a kick-ass barrel racer who's going to be out on her own in no time. And so I feel like that's something that's really sank into me. Just a friend had said that, this is about raising kids, but I think it's about trying to make it a bit more of a daily practice. But it's the days are long, but the years are short. And man, I just feel that at this stage in my life, I just feel it. So, I'm trying to team roping lots and trying to, yeah, got some goals there. And there's, you have times when you start to get a little bit more into just making it about the roping, but I don't know. I think at this stage in my life, I'm enjoying my horses more than I ever have in my whole life, and I'm pretty thankful for that. And I think it's a kind of a whole thing, the kids and where Cindy and I are at in our marriage, and we just rolled over 20 years. Um, you go through things enough, and then it starts to get to a place where it's you start really appreciating it, and yeah, I don't know. So I think I have wavered back and forth in that. There was a time where if I didn't ride my horses, I was grumpy because I was addicted to getting them rode. And that was where I found it wasn't even my peace. It was like, I'm sure you know that feeling. And then I just got to a place where I just, I didn't want to I didn't want my life to be consumed by that kind of thing. And I'm thankful that I was able to allow my business to adapt enough that just getting on horses wasn't the only way I was making money, because I think that promotes it, right? When you have to be slogging 15 horses a day to get by, that's real hard on the love, and now it's part of what I do. We're building horses, but it's not the essence of what I do anymore, which has liberated them from that space, and I'm thankful for that.
I definitely worked in a couple of barns that were the manufacturing kind of thing, and we'd have 30 horses ridden by lunchtime, something like
Yeah.
that. And it was just, I even timed myself once. I brought a colt, they're all 2 year olds now, from the arena to the barn, unsaddled it, hosed it off real fast, saddled another horse, long trotted out to the arena, 4 minutes. Like you talk about just
Yeah.
you're so in the rhythm. There was
Yeah.
no wasted motion any
Yeah.
which way.
Mhm.
But yeah, I have no desire to do that anymore. None whatsoever.
And I don't think the horses like it either. They're just a production line, and I think the horses desire more. There's a desire there for them to be a little more connected. Um, yeah, I think they like the task. I think they like working. I think horses generally like working. But some balance there, hey.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
Huh. I like to think that my indecisiveness is my fact gathering space. I'm not sure if my wife would agree or
Mhm.
not, but I
So
do
you like to
find myself.
research stuff
I just
before
like to,
making?
yeah, I like to sit back, and I find that sometimes when we're too quick, we end up not having enough information with the decision we're making. I think we can do that emotionally too when we're in a feeling, and then we're acting in a space when it maybe isn't. So I don't know. I do a lot of breath work. I do, a lot of meditation and stillness work. I don't know. I find if I'm not in a certain space, I have a hard time recognizing if I'm in the right place to make a decision or think straight. So I would say I sit back and ponder and think about it more than I would just right off the cuff. And um, generally, I find if I take a little more time, I'm going to be happier with my response than if I'm sharp and quick. So I don't know if that means indecisive or not. I'd probably say trying to be calculated. Um,
Yeah, no, I get you. But
yeah.
once you make the decision, you're not wishy-washy about it. You move on and handle whatever needs to be handled and so forth.
Yeah.
I'm a lot like that. My dad is worse. I know it's gonna get worse for me. Like he spent a year and a half
Hmm.
researching a hat, before he pulled the trigger and decided this was the right hat. And then he didn't like the hat.
Yeah, maybe when you get your brain full of too many things, then when you get what you get, you're wondering
Uh-huh.
if it would have been better to have something else.
Just go to a store and try it on and say, yeah, that one feels good.
And leave.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's funny.
Cold showers or cold food forever.
Cold showers, for certain.
So
Yeah, I
you,
love
you
the effects. I like that cold shower deal.
and being in Canada, I'm sure your cold tolerance is a little different than most people's cold tolerance. Are you
Yeah.
you're in Alberta? You're pretty far north in Alberta or more southerly
Well,
or
about a kilometer from where I sit right now is very center of Alberta.
okay.
The little town we live in is the very center, but population wise, we are north. There's not a lot much more north than us. But the northern limits of Alberta is all it's all trees. It's pretty wild. Um, but all the bigger cities are south, so we're pretty central. But it's still pretty cold. Like it's this is the first day it's really dropped off, and I think it was 25, 24 this morning, minus 24. So I don't know what that calculates for you, but it'll pucker your cheeks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, I'm just going to ask you this: if this is too personal and you don't want to talk about kids and stuff, but I
Mhm.
know like Canada has a lot of what do y'all call crown lands, like public land that y'all can. So, you're right up there in the middle of it. You and the family take advantage of that and head off into the woods and camp or whatever very often, or not too much.
Yeah, we don't camp too much. I always wanted a ski boat, and right before COVID, we ended up getting one, and it was kind of the best timing ever because that time was, it was pretty secluded, and that was something we could do, and so we went to the lake a lot. So going to the lake that couple summers was good, um, and then wow, the problem is that all my kids want to do is rodeo. Like that's so now we've gotten into that lane and we ended up selling the boat and selling everything. And now we got a living quarters trailer, and so then our camping is rodeo. Like that's rodeo.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. So whether it's a team rope and jackpot or a rodeo, we're pretty dialed in. That's a pretty consuming sport, because there's so many.
Hmm.
Once you get into that space, there's always something going on. And when my daughter barrel races breakaway ropes and team ropes, and my son calf ropes and team ropes, it's like, man, there's jackpots kind of for anything, and the kids are so dialed in and they're so hungry for it that yeah. So long story short, no, we don't. We'll go riding out there every once in a while. There's lots of cool riding on the edge of the mountains there. You can get up into the hills there. It's pretty cool. But we tend to not go that direction that often. My wife would like to. I think that'll come in time.
All right, a few riding directed questions for you here. Would you say that your hands or your legs are better?
For myself personally, or as an
Yeah,
idea.
for you.
Well, I guess I would say they both have really important purposes. I would say that, the style of riding that I have, I like to try to think about my legs, my seat and legs, preserve the proper function of the hand. Uh, my hands are going to feel what's going on. I would say a rider needs to have really clean leg aids. So I would like to think that maybe my leg aids are pointer. Um, a good question. For myself personally, I'd like to be better with my leg gates. I would say that probably a default. It's hard not to default to your hands when your legs aren't working. So what I'm going to go with is I hope my leg aids are better than my hands. You'd have to ask my horse.
So I would say my legs as well. I kind of wonder. I look for these little patterns in here in places. Um, it's like you and I have done a lot of young horse, problem horse stuff, which means a lot of groundwork stuff.
Mhm,
And I'm a big proponent in that the lead rope is your first bridle rein.
mhm,
And so I don't have leg aids when I'm working a horse on the ground. So theoretically, I have more practice with my
mhm,
hands than I do with
mhm,
my legs. But I feel like my legs are better. They're my stronger
mhm,
point,
mhm, mhm.
also. So I don't go
Yeah,
figure.
yeah,
Things to ponder. Anyway,
yeah.
right lead or left lead? So
Oh,
do you
left
have
lead.
one that,
Not even a question.
you know, hence the
Starting
team
Colts.
roping?
Maybe it is,
Yeah.
but starting Colts. I've had to work to get a balance in my leads, and even today, if I have something that's a little bit unconfident, I'm going left. If I in the left lead, I don't think you can unseat me. In the right lead, sometimes I feel like I just feel like I haven't even sat on a horse before. There's just certain times. So I've had to do a lot of my own body work. Um, and really get focused on it because my body, like, I damaged my hip pretty bad when I was a kid, and injuries, and then you start storing stuff in places, but no, definitely left lead. That's not even a doubt.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions. Are you right or left footed? Like if I
I'm
threw
left.
a soccer ball out there
Yeah.
and said kick it, left foot?
Yep.
Okay. And if do you slalom ski or did you slalom ski with the ski boat?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Well,
Wakeboarding and kneeboarding and tubing. We never skied much.
okay. Well, I was gonna. So you're another one of the anomalies because my my hypothesis here was that right-footed people would have an easier time in the left lead
Mm,
because,
mm,
and then the same. But like I was a slalom skier. I thought about going pro slalom
mm.
skiing actually when I was a teenager, and I am
Cool.
right foot forward in the boot, left foot behind when I would slalom ski, which
Mm,
is opposite. But I'm also a left lead guy, so
mm.
I think what that's all saying is this is not as neatly connected as I would like for it to be, and it's all just
Yeah.
factoids, right?
I totally agree with you. I think there's a part of our brain that wants to package all that stuff up, but I feel like it's too much of a spider web because, there's certain tensions, there's certain competencies, there's certain injuries. I think you put all that in a computer and it spits out a product. I feel like that's a little bit what happens over time. You know nothing, and then you know some things, and then you draw some conclusions, and then you get more data, and it kind of messes that whole system up. And then you get more
Hmm.
data, and it's like, well, and maybe it isn't so linear. Yeah, I feel like that's part of the wisdom and experience of the old horseman. It's like, well, it depends. I know that was one of Harry's big things. It depends.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this too. So I'm going to out you here. Josh played collegiate volleyball, which might be a surprise to some people. When you would go to like serve or
Hmm.
spike a volleyball, are you right or left-handed on that?
Left-handed.
Okay. And you're generally left-handed altogether? Okay, I didn't
Hmm.
remember that about you.
I
So
shoot with both hands, so I don't have as dominant an eye. And then in college, I tried to write my notes with both hands. I'd rewrite my notes with my other hand, and I hated it, but I just kind of pushed myself to do it.
I'm assuming you rope with your right hand.
I do. I changed
Yeah.
that. I used to rope with my left hand, but then I don't know. When I was a kid, I had some team roper say, "You can't do that," and generally it's right. You would have to have someone doing it with you to do that. But so I just changed. Um, but I'm left hand dominant for sure.
Okay. You just gave me an idea for another question in the future here. Um,
Cool.
what is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature? I probably asked you that before, but I don't remember the answer. So
Dinosaur. Dang. Hmm. Dinosaur. I think I was like every kid, I just always everybody goes through that phase when you're little. Um, hmm.
That's why I put this question in, because once you're older than about 7 or 8, no one asks you what your favorite dinosaur is anymore, and I'm trying to bring that back.
Yeah, what a loss to life, huh?
Really.
I'd say the Triceratops. That's kind of a cool creature.
Uh, on the same page, my friend. Absolutely.
Yeah,
You could ride that little tank and just plow stuff down, right? I
right
mean,
on.
yep,
Who's gonna stop you?
100%. All right. Well, Josh, that concludes our lightning round questions. I'm gonna add up your score here. Um, I have got you with a new high score of all time,
What?
4,619 points. Man,
Wow.
that is something. Yeah. That entitles you either to an awkward silence or a genuine compliment, your choice.
I think the awkward silence is sounds a lot like a lot of fun. So let's go with that.
All right.
What a
I'm
cool
beginning to
reward.
think I'm getting a strong pattern of awkward silences, which I really like. And now I'm starting to think people are afraid to have me compliment them. I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, what is this guy going to say? I better take the safe choice here.
Well, how about this? How about this? Let's just reverse now. How about a compliment?
Okay. Well, I'm going to play off of what you said about thoughts and feelings. I do find you to be a pretty uniquely centered guy there, because I would judgmental butthole that I am, I would look at most people and pretty easily sort them off. It's like red cow, black cow. I don't have a whole lot of
Uh,
trouble figuring that out for you, in case you didn't know. You really are one of those guys who kind of does straddle that line, even though you
mm,
relational horsemanship, and you kind of think, oh, is he going to be a woo woo kind of a guy? But
yeah.
then you have a pretty pragmatic, analytical side to you
Mm,
as well, and I really appreciate that. Um,
mm,
I I would say I'm more on the thoughts side, but I definitely appreciate and see the need for that balance. And
mm.
you probably have that way better than most people do, I would say. So that's what
Well,
I'm going to go
thank you
with.
for that. I'll take that compliment.
Yeah. See, it didn't hurt at all, did it?
Not even a bit.
Oh. Okay. Well, for those who may not know you, or what you're doing professionally, would you give us a little bit of the 30,000 foot view of what all it is that Josh Nichol does in the horse business?
Mm, mm. Oh man, that's an interesting question. It's funny. I have some of my daughter. My daughter has a friend, and she's a barrel racer, and she really likes my work, and she always laughs because people say, "What does Josh do?" And she's like, "I don't really know, but it works." That's kind of a compliment coming from a barrel racing kid. Um, I kind of look at my world of, I want to get to know horses. I want to understand them. I want to develop them. I've never intended to teach or pass any of this information on. I just had a hunger to understand horses. And that kind of caused me to chase a certain trail, and I got to ride with some pretty cool people, and my own brain is a seeker, so I've tried to use the horse as my greatest teacher of what works and what doesn't. Um, and the I kind of have three pillars in my work, and one is leadership, and it's kind of understanding what a horse needs to kind of feel like they want to work for you, feel safe with you, and then the other is athleticism, which is how does their body work? What do you got to do to get their body in a place where they can be athletic, support a rider, and get a job done with a level of finesse. And then the resilient side, which is how much can you handle in life? And I feel like that's a hindered space in the world right now. It's just being able to handle challenge and pressure, and the toughness of life is not necessarily as promoted as feeling connected. And to me, the greatest victories are when you can stay connected under pressure. And that's a big problem. Like pressure shows up and people just collapse, or horses collapse, right? And so then I try to juggle all those things, and then that's kind of what I would say is at the essence of relational horsemanship. What does it mean to be in relationship and yet do hard things, be able to really get after it and do that. my my lifestyle, I cowboyed all over for a long time and trained horses for the public and trained my own horses and messed around with a variety of different competition things. And I'm just a student of the horse. I'm never really have ever flashed my own competency. I just want to get better and know horses better, and I love being in the student role. Just love learning. And that's somehow people started following me as I was doing that. And my first tag, kind of the business slogan I went with, was a horseman's pursuit. And I feel like that's what I love to stick with, because I'm just trying to pursue horses and enjoy helping people too. That's been really fun. So the idea of relational horsemanship developed, and it's just this competence of kind of what do horses need from us, and kind of what do we need from them, and how do we all feel like we can get along together. What does a horse's body need? What does it mean to be in relationship with the things that we do, with cattle, with horses, with tack, with leads, with trot? What does it mean to be in relationship with that stuff? And I find that the idea of relational horsemanship, it's been the edge that has made me want to change my name, actually, because I feel like I can get slotted really fast with that. But when you're really clicking with anything, like when you have that perfect golf swing, you're in perfect relationship with the club and the ball. When you are dialed into a conversation with somebody, you're in perfect relationship with their energy. I'm trying to find that flow state, that space where what you're doing isn't sacrificing the connection you have. And the connection you desire doesn't also sacrifice what you're capable of doing. And I feel like that's the great challenge of life. And I
Hmm.
desire that. I desire not to give up competing and doing hard things and having fun, but being able to be mindful around having relationship with competition so that it doesn't destroy you and your horses. But on the same hand, that desiring relationship doesn't mean you can't do anything anymore.
So one thing, and I'm going to try to say this as candidly and truthfully and delicately as I can. And I know this is not, just understand, I'm not trying to insult you when I
Mhm.
when I say this, but I would consider you to be a hyper verbal guy. So
Mm,
like you,
mm,
when you're doing presentations and talking and stuff, you're just going a million miles an hour, and you tend to
mhm,
use some pretty abstract terms at times. And the way my
mm.
brain works, I'm like, okay, that word could mean three things, and
Yeah,
this
yeah.
next word could mean three things, and
Mhm,
so there's nine combinations in this sentence of what Josh meant. And so when I saw you actually work a horse at the Best Horse Practices Summit a few years ago, like that really helped tie what you were saying down to what you
mm,
you meant for
mhm.
me. And I really appreciated, everything you were doing and talking about right there. But that was what kind of clicked for me, where I was like, okay, that's what he does. That's what he's doing. I got it now. So here's my thought of that. I would consider, within the realm of relationship and communication, the highest level of communication tends to be very simple, very fast, and very nonverbal. So
Mhm.
like if you've ever, I'm sure you have, your building fence or something with someone, and y'all have been doing this long enough where you don't have, everybody has their job. It just runs smooth. There's no talking. That you point, really little signals. You read body language, hand me the hammer, and blah 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 blah. But you don't. You could go, 6 hours of work and hardly said eight words to one another,
Mhm.
and that's peak. Like I love
Mhm.
working in those kinds of situations. It's the when I have to talk a lot, and you
Mhm.
didn't catch what was going on here, and now I'm waiting 30 seconds to hand me the hammer, and you should have known, because like we've done this 15 times now, and
Mhm.
you know. So would you agree with that with a horse, that the communication there is the same way? It gets more subtle, more simple,
Mhm.
less obtrusive, or whatever, as you're getting that worked out with him as well.
Oh yeah, everything gets dialed in, and your subtle little changes have a lot more bearing, and the words you use have more meaning. I think it's funny because I know that I have gotten to a place where I'm wordy. The great challenge is that you get paid to talk, And clinics are tough with this because, it's, if I'm sitting I've been clinicking for 25 years now. Or yeah, crazy. And if you're sitting at a clinic and you and I are sitting there and I start to explain something and then you just don't say anything. And then you say something and then you don't say anything for as long as you might want to if you were just riding a horse. It creates this culture of, it's like, you're, so I think that that's kind of just naturally what's happened is you're trying to find three ways to explain something. You're trying to get people, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to create connections to a feel state. We're trying to use certain words. And then what happens is you say something to somebody and they don't understand you. So then as a good teacher, it's my job then to maybe try to say it another way and then come
Mhm.
at it with a different example. And so I feel like that's kind of what's promoted so much conversation. Outside of this realm, I don't talk a lot.
Yeah, and I didn't mean, so I wasn't trying to say you're too wordy. It was more your communication style talking and mine are I would say a little parallel. So I
Yeah.
wasn't exactly on the same line as you, and there's
Yeah.
times when I wasn't sure. The more I know you and the more I've talked with you, the more but I think there's clearly an audience that absolutely resonates with the way that you
Hmm.
present stuff. Again,
Yeah.
I'm not good at this. That's why I challenge myself with the lightning round game to have to give people compliments because I'm not good at that kind of communication at all, and I tend to accidentally offend people at times, and that was not what I was trying to say.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't take it bad at all. You're right. You're not wrong. I use my word. That's part of my deal. But I do wrestle with that because on one hand, you're challenged to use your words to kind of say things in a different way to open up awareness and concept and feel. And on the other hand, you can overdo the space with words, and so then that's as a juggling act, and I've taken the task, but yes, I didn't take that bad at all.
so one of the things you and I did have a kind of a private conversation years ago about the word leadership,
Yeah.
and I have to say I'm honestly a little surprised you still have that in your three pillars.
Mm,
I don't disagree that it needs to be there.
mm,
My take on that, and maybe I was misunderstanding you. You were kind of talking about the negative connotation that that word has in
mm.
the horsemanship world now, which I think is folly. I think that's part of that pendulum shift thing of us
Yeah.
kind of leaving the realm of reality for
Hmm.
the realm of what I wish was true rather
Hmm.
than what actually is. So why don't you expound on that a little bit? How do you view leadership maybe versus how the world is currently viewing that word or
Hmm.
connotation, denotation, all of that stuff?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I fit into the world anymore. But I just don't try to juggle the offense state. That's a whole other conversation. But for me, if you can't fit into a horse's world right, they're not gonna trust you. They're not gonna, and so sometimes that means you have to be able to step in and be a strong presence and clarify things. And other times it means you have to be a soft center that they can feel. And just the horses teach it, like, and that's always I just think that we need to test things more. Let the horses test our theories, and not by just staying in the arena, not by keeping them in a small world. You want to test your theories, go out and ask those questions and see how your horse handles it. Like that'll the horses test things, not us. But no, leadership is a big deal. If you can't set up a space where what's going on in you, leadership really means that is that I have the ability to have what's going on inside of me, create a space that allows others to feel safe, and then when there's pressure, that they pull from me rather than feel compelled to obey me. And I feel like that's the challenging balance. There's moments when I'm gonna, put up a pretty good boundary and it's gonna be pretty clear. But a lot of times, you're just trying to be an energy that allows a horse to feel safe. You're giving them what they need. You're taking care of what's going on for them and settling it. And if that isn't a conversation for people, then probably they're living a pretty small life. If there's, that,
Mhm.
yeah.
No, I mean I agree with you. I feel I'm kind of working on a what's going to wind up being a very long article, I think, but it's basically, we now have this trend of that dominance theory has been debunked,
Uh,
kind of running through everywhere, and I don't think that's even close to true. And I've got some articles or some research papers that I'm going to source, and I want to make sure I dot all my I's and cross
uh,
all my T's. But it could take me a year to write this thing. But so so what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you feel like dominance has no place, was a misguided theory, or still applicable? Or, and I know that's a big, hairy, complex question,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but
it's fine.
any thoughts on it?
I just think everybody takes everything so extreme. When you say dominance, then what they do is they throw up some picture on the wall of somebody absolutely obliterating a horse, and that's what dominance means. So then if you're, there are times when there is no doubt about it. I am not, you are not running through my space. Like there, so it's like, so is that dominance? What is the term? And you said it earlier that we can get lost in terms. And a horse needs to feel your strength, and that there's moments when my strength needs to show up to keep a horse from themselves. Like they're going to lose their thinking brain, and if somebody doesn't step in and support that, that's a lot of times what can create chaotic environments for horses. So I just don't know what the term means. And okay, does softness then mean that we just stand there and snuggle our horses and we never do anything? But I think the problem is that the more you live life with horses, the more you're living it. Like you're out there and you're doing stuff, and your horses are a part of your lifestyle. That's a different conversation of the things that you might have to have conversations with than the culture right now, because the culture desires to just be in relationships where we're just trying to be okay. So we lose connection to living life together. And I think of that, it's the same as relationship with my wife. And I talked about this earlier, but like, wouldn't it be great if all that the relationship was with your wife was just snuggling and drinking tea, and it's all good, and there's they never had to deal with anything that came up that was hard. And we're just in a culture now where there's just not a capacity to deal with hard things or be able to really show up for each other. And if a person speaks to my wife a certain way and I stand up for her, is that dominance? Like, is that like, what is that? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, so
Or
it's
is it
it's muddy for
protection?
me,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like being
Protection for her,
strong.
dominance to whoever messed up and said what they shouldn't have said, right?
Betcha. That's right. And so for me, that's part of being in relationship with my wife, but also being in relationship with that moment. So I don't know. I just think that, again, you got to figure out what the horse needs. And we slight so heavily into what we like, not necessarily what the horse needs. So if what I like and what I desire is causing my horse to not be able to leave the yard, then it don't matter what you like. Like what you like is skewing your ability to be in the world. So I'm just trying to figure out what that means, and then hopefully not losing a depth of connection, but also being able to step in and be strong if I need to be for my horse. And is that a hard line to walk? Yeah, it's just easier to talk about, and in the moment, can I show up for that? Yeah,
Hopefully, yeah. Well, I completely agree with you. I think it's the scars that make things beautiful. I like that old worn out saddle, not the one that's fresh and you can't tell where the legs go in the
right,
seat anymore, you know. And that's what makes things beautiful and develops that relationship, I think. Kind of
right.
like the wife. Like, it would be nice to say we've been married 30 years and have never had a fight, but that would actually be a big red flag, wouldn't it? Either you're lying or one of you's holding a whole lot back, right? You know, that's going to
100%.
build up and that dam will break one day.
Or you're not
Uh,
living in the same
mm,
house.
yeah. So I have a uniquely Canadian question for you here, since we're talking about human nature. So y'all have the slang word tilly for a fight, which comes from tilt in hockey
Mm.
when there's a fight. And I heard that described as shortening it. But if you think about it, tilt is one syllable and tilly is two. So do you think that it's wrong to have abbreviations that are actually longer than the first word? So like we say www, that is longer than World Wide Web. It's twice as many syllables.
Right, right. That's funny. See,
All
that's your
right.
analytical brain going.
It's also, yeah, me. We got deep, so I'm making us laugh for a moment there. So one thing I did want to ask you about, since you have the relationship sort of perspective, coming at it from that perspective, how do you deal with or square, or maybe you completely disagree with what I'm about to say also, but like relationships with horses are not transferable. So like we could have this bay horse here, and I've been riding him for 60 days and I can do all these things on him and he's cool with it. And then the owner comes for their very first ride and they climb up there and all of a sudden we got a different horse
Mhm.
on our hands. And I would say that's because, I've built a relationship with that horse and they know and trust me and know what to expect. And then the owner, even though they raised him from a baby up there in the saddle for the first time,
Mhm.
they're an unknown quantity. So
Mhm.
nodding your head sounds like you know exactly what I'm talking about. So how do you, from the relational aspect, describe and square that
Yeah.
away?
Yeah. I look at it. I look at it the same way. A dominance-based approach. If you're gonna be very dominant with your horse, that's the only way you can get to a place where you can shut down every opinion they have, so that your leg always means the same thing. But the horse cannot be involved. I put my leg here. That means this. When I do this to your physical body, you listen and you do not bring an opinion. But the more any creature is involved, okay, like my wife's a strong lady. We've built relationship, and if some other person comes up and treats her a certain way, she's gonna have a relationship with that treatment. You see what I'm saying? Okay, and you're not changing that. She has a standard for how she's going to be spoke to. But I think that's the same with horses. Is you develop a relationship with a horse, and that horse is in relationship with you, and then you talk to them a certain way, or somebody comes there and they kick them in the guts or they pull in their face, and yeah, the horse can have an opinion about that. But that's what allows us to grow. But yet, there's a part of us that just wants everything just to do what we say, and I feel like that's the funny part about saying a horse is bad or being a jerk or whatever. But most of the time, they're just saying, "I don't want to be treated the way you're treating me," or they're giving you feedback about how they're being handled. So I think that's another part where we need to put more onus on people. It's like if you want that to be different, then you need to get better. It's like I'm gonna say that in the most loving way possible, but it's like if your horse is, struggling, you want to get better, then we need to get better. And it's okay to be held to that fire. It's a little softer of it's a harder issue because we want to be careful with people, but on the same hand, it's a soft culture we live in now, and for someone to
Yeah.
be here that they have to do better, and it's not just something their horse has to do. That's a challenge for trainers, is because we feel like we need to take that pressure on us, that I need to um, get your horse to a place where they'll handle your inabilities, and I want to give your horse a culture of knowledge so that as your abilities grow, you have something you can connect with. But you also have to show up. Like you have to get better. And that's been a big piece for me, because I meant, how it is as you're training, you're always trying to get the horses to a place where they can just handle the lack of knowledge of a person. And that's actually got me out of training, actually.
Yeah. I had a definite period where I was still riding a lot of 30, 60-day colts for the public, and the better I got, the more difficulty they had.
Mm,
It was like the gap of what the horse was
yep.
used to, what they have to do now was wider than they can make sense out of. So how do you handle that with customers? And this would tie in somewhat. I don't. It seems to be everything kind of seems to be in cycles sometimes, and I've
Mhm.
been getting asked this question a lot lately by customers and followers of how do they tell who to follow, who's
Mm,
got the right tact, and because I think we would
mhm,
both agree there's a lot of people out there that have good and valuable information, but there are also people out there that are not at a stage where they really need to be teaching the public yet,
mhm,
and the people in the public may not know enough to, they're just looking up, so they don't know how much difference relatively there would be between this person and this other
right.
person because they're both above me, right? So,
Yeah.
so do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts on or advice you would give people in how to appropriately use their judgment
Mhm,
to kind of tell the difference? So you talked about like the people that are actually man on the ground doing it, for
mhm.
instance.
Mhm.
Any other?
Yeah, with folks, I just encourage people, it's kind of a twofold lens for me, is you have to feel like the person that you're speaking to isn't there was a time in the past where the professional told you to do something, shoot, it didn't matter what they told you to do, you're gonna do it, even if it didn't feel good inside, so you were kind of like, oh my goodness, oh, I don't want to do that, but you just feel compelled because you're gonna do what you're told. And now we live in a time where it's like we can realize, it's got to feel right for you. So you have to be able to feel like you can connect with them on a feel level. But then that you also need to be able to be inspired by the way their horses are. So if you need to not just be inspired by what they say, because we just live in a time where there's just so many ideas. But the key is that you also need to see their horses. That's a big thing for me. You need to see how their horses move. You need to see how they handle pressure. You need to see what they're doing. And that's the other side of it, which is a lot less common with as much clinicians and teaching as there is. And it's not as often that you see people riding their own horses anymore. So that's a big thing. So I just like to encourage people to see both. You got to feel good about what they're saying. You got to feel good about them as a person, and you got to kind of feel good about the whole package. But then also watch their horses. See how their horses go. How are they existing in life? And if that's not inspiring to you, and if you see them struggling with the same issues you're struggling with, or whatever, right? Like whatever the thing is, that should also be something you're inspired by.
So would you say within kind of this industry, do you have a greater challenge adapting to the breadth and variety of people rather than the horses? So who challenges you more, and do you feel like you have to get more creative and
Mm,
explain this 10 different ways? Are the horses easy to get along with and the people are a lot trickier, or vice versa, or which way does
yeah.
that go for you?
I think the biggest challenge is our culture right now. We're living in a culture that's continuously moving more towards non-pros. There's people that are now able to go back into horses and they haven't had them, and so we're dealing with a massive culture of people that have much less competency. So that of course makes the horses so much easier. And that's where a lot of, great horsemen and horsewomen, they just love riding horses because, your system of flow of understanding horses is much more consistent than the system of handling people who are less and less experienced and are not even able to put in the time to get more experienced. So their growth pattern is way slighter, way slower. And I've had to just totally release myself to that. I want to help people. I want to help them where they're at, and their path is going to be their path. And I always, talk to people about that. Your path is going to move at the level of commitment you can put in. It's no different than anything else. We're talking about that with my son's hockey team. I'm helping coach the hockey team, and that's some of these kids are just disciplined. They're at practice all the time, and there's other kids that just don't come to practice. They don't come to practice enough, and it's hard because you're trying to develop a team, so then their growth is going to be dependent upon their commitment. And we would love to just see great results, but results come with how much effort you're putting in. And the guy the kids rope with, it says a thing on his barn, and it's more about competition, but it's like while you're not practicing, someone else is, and when you meet them in competition, they will beat you. And I think of that less about competition, but more about our own growth. If I want to get to a certain point and I'm not putting in a certain level of work, then I need to change the point I want to hit on that growth pattern. And I'll say that to people. Well, if you only can commit, 1, 2 days a month, then it might take you 20 years to get to your goals. And that's okay. You just got to relax on that. And so I've relaxed on that as well as a teacher, because you can't expect people to change more than they can put in the effort. So you have to align yourself with what their commitments can be, because they have their mothers or husbands, or they're working 6 days a week and they got one night a week they can go ride their horse. We just live in a different climate. That's
Yeah.
just times have changed so much. So
Well, and if there's anything that horse people are well known for, it is reasonable expectations. So,
yeah,
uh,
right. Yeah.
but what about, so again, kind of dealing with people, I'm sure like any horse business right now, you're dealing more with women than men. So do you find any challenges or any changes that you make generally in explaining some of this stuff to women. So like I'll give you one example that I use. I've never had to give this example to a guy, but I've used it with a lot of women. So say like you and your husband are out on your 30th wedding anniversary dinner or something, and you get up to go to the bathroom and you come back and there's his high school girlfriend sitting at the table with him. She's got her hand up on his forearm, and she's laughing hilariously at his jokes, and he's not that funny. And all of a sudden the whole restaurant feels you. Like as your anger rises, like the hair goes up on people's necks, they're looking around like, oh, something's about to go down here. Like, because I find a lot of times women have difficulty accessing that when they need to get bigger and enforce a boundary or something like that. Many of them have trouble. So that's the example I always use for them, and it's worked pretty well so far. So
Right.
you have any stuff like that?
Oh yeah, I guess always trying to kind of figure out ways to get people to relate to feelings, but that's a good example. I often will use you're not wrong, the climate of horsemanship is primarily women. What I find is just that, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to talk about allowing people to get outside their body, to feel space and transmit energy. And I find that I'll often use, when you have someone who's not happy or sad, and you hug them, and we know the difference between a hug, when some hugs are just like there's just nothing in it, the limp fish handshake kind of, versus that person who just wants you to feel better, like you are trying to transmit energy. And I think the intentionality of it, when it's very intentional and you're putting it out there and you're desiring to be felt, you're desiring to bring a change. um yeah, I like anything that allows people to be able to tangibly connect to expressing energy.
What would you? So I listened to your podcast with Noel Floyd, which was a really good episode, by the way.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
you got into talking about authenticity, and I wanted to provocatively challenge you on that a little bit,
Mm,
um, or just give you the situation where authenticity might not be great. So
mm,
let's say we have the horse that needs a confident rider, and we have the rider that's anything but, and they're fearful, and maybe this horse has put them on the ground a time before or something
mhm,
like that, and there's really their authentic self is a shaking, quivering bowl of jello.
mhm.
So what advice do you want that person showing up authentically, or is that a fake it till you make it kind of a thing,
Mm.
or how do you view that?
Yeah, good question. I think absolutely you need to be authentic. You just need to change your expectations. Someone's giving you guidance to put you into situations you shouldn't be in. And I feel like that's another microwave thing, is we just want stuff. We want to get there. But I've never found a horse to be bothered if a person's bothered. I find that what happens is when you're not feeling confident with the thing you're asking, and then you're pushing them into areas that would necessitate you to be confident to get the horse to do it. That's the problem.
Mhm.
But if you're nervous, then you need to read the room on that, and you need to put yourself into a situation where you can start where you're a little more confident, or get someone to support you or something. But I found that horses appreciate authenticity. What they struggle with is the expectations of that happens inside of that authenticity when it's not aligned with what can actually happen. Does that make sense?
Mhm. So do you find that people are often unwilling to, or maybe unaware of, because I find this a little bit, they never had the thought of backing up and
Hmm.
going to a safer, this horse threw me when I was jumping 4 feet. Well, have you tried ground poles?
Right, right.
No.
Yep.
And maybe we get rid of the 4 foot part of this and
Yep.
back up a little bit and do something we know we
True.
can accomplish. So you see that a lot?
I think in our new culture, that's happening quite a bit. This idea of being able to regroup, slow it down, take the pressure off. You know, I find that, yeah, that's happening more and more. Um, but I feel like there's still a desire to have what we don't earn. I think that's where the whole dominance culture comes from. Is, like, I haven't the horse is trying to show me what what's going on here, and I don't like it. So then you're being disrespectful or you're being bad, and now you need to be disciplined, but I haven't earned anything. And the horse is showing that. So I think on one side, it's a matter of being able to read the room on where we need to be. And I think we do live in a culture where there's a lot of need to get to green, because I feel like a lot of people just in life, they're in red, which is why green with horses has become such a desired place. It's like I just want a place where there's no argument, there's nobody demanding anything from me. I just want to be in a good place, and I love that because I think horses can provide that. But on the same hand, if you want more, then you need to grow within yourself and develop those skill sets. Okay, so read the room on where are you at? Where are you at with that horse? And then we need to stop over expecting, because when you become nervous, it's because you are doing something you lack the competency to achieve. There's something that's not there. You don't have the skill set, you don't have the timing, you don't have the balance. Okay, get on a horse that's schooled. Go talk to your neighbor and get on that finished horse that just can lope around and build your confidence. Start working on the reason why you're so nervous. Have you done any inner work to get to a place where you're stabilizing yourself? So there's a lot of ways at that don't put the pressure on the horse to just kind of pound through it, so to speak, to hold you up. Because sometimes they'll be able to, but that can't be the consistent expectation.
What is this one of my favorite ways of you describing something? So would you talk a little bit about what you meant by green and red right there?
Yeah, so green is a place the horse feels regulated. Yellow is when they're starting to feel pushed. Red is when their brain shuts off. And that's a place that, we need to back off, because they're not even thinking anymore. So I've pushed the horse into that red state. But if you want to push red back, you need to put green into yellow. And to put green into yellow, you have to have a good relationship with green. You have to have a space where your horse knows how to be calm, and you have a good relationship with that. And then that you can go into yellow and not lose your thinking brain. And so then that's going to be different for every person. And that's what you have to figure out. Like, what is yellow to you? What is yellow to your horse? And then when you get into yellow, can you bring your green skills to yellow? And that's what I call develops gold. You kind of surpass fear when you can put green skills into the yellow space. Now, for a lot of us, there's a lot of kind of conversation around yellow is actually red. Like, if your horse is at all bothered, then they're dysregulated. And I don't agree. Not even a little bit. I think that horses have a lot of capacity to be unsure, but still think, and I think that's actually where the most power comes, when the world starts to shake a little bit and you've got the ability to use your thinking brain. And that doesn't come by staying in the harbor. It comes by starting to handle the waves. So then that's a big piece for me in my work, is trying to figure out how to do that. And I think everybody's got to be able to find themselves in that. Like, where are you at with that? And you might be different than someone else. Don't compare yourself.
So I love the analogy of the red, yellow, green, and I absolutely agree with you both on that. The real work, all the real progress happens in yellow, and the more skillful you get, the better you can ride that line without blowing the horse up and pushing them
Yeah.
into red. But you're gonna make some mistakes. If you don't ever push one to red, you're not exploring yellow very much either. So it's okay for some of those mistakes to happen at times. When you're greener, you're gonna
It's not even
accidentally.
sometimes okay. It's just gonna happen. Like, if you're not challenging yourself, then that's the only place. Like, the only place everything stays right is when you do nothing. And if you're gonna go out there and you're gonna try some things, you're gonna push yourself, you're going to struggle. But that's the judgment honing place, right? So I try to even get away from it being a mistake, because you don't have any reference. So if you don't have any reference, a mistake is when you know exactly how to do something, and you've done it a lot, and then you kind of do something different. But that's a known. There's something more known there. But when there's no knowns, it's not a mistake. You don't even know how to stand on your legs. You don't have space for that. Like saying a sailor feels waves for the first time and falls down, and that was a mistake.
Mhm.
So I feel like people need a lot more freedom to feel like you can go into places. I did a Q&A last night, and a lady was almost needing permission to feel like it was okay if it didn't just go right. But I think that there's so much cultivation around the horse has to stay perfectly calm. They have to stay perfectly calm. And if they don't, it's a problem. Well, that's like saying if, my wife and I get upset about something, then we've screwed up our marriage. Like
Yep.
it's not the case. Like being able to experience those things and feel those emotions and have that's not the problem. It's how do we handle each other in the process, right?
Yeah, I could not agree more. I don't like that trend of what you like everything has to stay green. You
Hmm.
upset the horse at all, stress him and all. No, like
Yeah,
you're building a horse you can't take out of the arena. Like he can't handle it, that resilience, that third pillar of yours, right? You do not build resilience by doing that. You build a very loose scaffolding that is going to collapse the first time the wind blows a little bit, right?
that's right. And I compare it to relationships and marriage, like you and your wife have been together for a certain period of time, and my wife and I is kind of similar, and it's like that the depth of the relationship comes by how you've been able to handle the storms, and it's that's the glue in our marriage is how well we've handled the pressure, and how well we handled it in the beginning was horribly because we didn't have any reference. You don't get I always say this, if boy, wouldn't it be great if we got a user manual on women and women got a user manual on men, and then you just knew exactly. You didn't have any questions. There was no unknowns, and I know my wife perfectly now. It's not like that. It's like you got to have a commitment to working it through, and what you are competent in is going to develop through the pressure. So I don't know. It's a bit messier of a topic, and I feel like I'm really trying to stand on that. But I feel like as people really start to recognize that if we get too focused on the green, our worlds start getting too small and we lose competency to actually get out there and live life. I think that that's going to become more and more known. But it is trendy. It is trendy, right? And there's a great value in the green space. I'm not going to deny that, but not to stay there. You know.
Yep. Well, I think this is a good time to bring up our sponsor for the episode, Josh. And since you are one of my favorite Canadians, I got a nice Canadian sponsor here. Um,
Perfect.
Loons, Beavers, and Cobra Chickens, eh? That's right, folks. The Great Travel Lodge refueling station in the Great White North is expanding. Sorry about that, Tim Hortons. To be fair, we won't serve any donuts. Loons, Beavers, and Cobra Chickens is the only place you could try smoked loon, beaver poutine, beaver tail cracklings, and jerked Canada Goose to go. Stop by and fill up your favorite snowmobile, heating fuel, or truck and pay your 4x carbon taxes all in one spot. We even offer dentistry at all of our locations due to the risks of trying to eat Canada Goose jerky, and we've even instituted a nationwide donation program of your old teeth for hockey players in need. Sorry. You won't get stuck holding the door here, as we've got doormen to handle the foot traffic at the door and solve the inevitable problem of two bucks holding the doors, each waiting on the other to go first, both saying, sorry, go ahead, eh? The whole time. We lost two good men that way last year, and we've learned our lesson, eh? We got sports betting on hockey, eh? Rush, Celine Dion, and the Bare Naked Ladies are playing nonstop over the PA system. Yeah, no, yeah, sorry if it's too loud. We also now taking bets on how long King Charles lasts and whether or not former Prince Harry is taken back into the fold without a DNA test. Sorry if you're not into that. Our Saskatchewan locations also offer wind watching. Sorry if you're a bit miffed on some 10-ply hoser who lost the last game. Feel free to fight some our on-site Cobra chickens. We've got greater ones for the adults and lesser ones for the kiddos. Or if you're really put out, fight our declawed bears. They love a good Donnybrook. Sorry. Come in and get some Canadian bacon and bannock, fresh Berta beef, and some Montreal steak spice, Newfoundland blueberries, beaver poutine with mayo, or a pint of Ryan Reynolds' new maple syrup, Monopoly. We'd offer snow tires and chains, but it's not like Americans are driving around up here, is it? So who needs them, eh? Sorry. Anyway, if you need fuel, food, fun, a restaurant, or a rest stop, you're pert near one anyway. Loons, Beavers, and Cobra Chickens. Long name, great logo. All right.
Dang.
I threw everything but the kitchen sink at that
I
one.
was
So
gonna say there's a bunch in there.
I've been watching Letterkenny lately, and it just that's a great show. I don't know if that's the way it really is, but it's the way I want to imagine that it
Yeah,
really is.
that's great.
So one thing that you have talked about a lot that I wanted to pick your brain on is what you call receiving state.
Mm.
And so why don't you tell us what you're referencing when you say that and why it's so important?
Yeah, I think that that's one of the pieces that horses seek. I think that's kind of what the herd dynamic is always trying to establish. And I feel like in the herd dynamic, it's not really about dominance, but about confidence. And it gets to a place where they're going to have that conversation until there is a flowing receiving state from one horse to another. When you kick one horse into the herd, and that receiving state comes almost immediately, and then the herd just goes back to eating because that receiving state is what's going to allow them to decide, who's going to follow whom and who has the most confidence in the group. So I think that in our human relationships with horses, there's not enough conversation around, openness and the horse receiving us and kind of taking our information on, because most of the time a horse will reach for a person and then we just recede right away. We don't even know it, and maybe that's more of a Canadian thing. But that whole idea of not wanting to be pushy, or we don't want to. And then a lot of times when we feel energy come towards us, we feel like it's aggressive or it's dominance based. But horses are seeking those connections. They're seeking to feel you and just to establish awareness. Where a lot of horses, they don't really want to lead. I would say, maybe that's high, but I would say probably 95% of horses don't want to lead. They would prefer having someone else, having something else take care of stuff. And a lot of leadership that we think we see in our herds is just absolute lack of confidence when you see horses, the way they're acting. And um, a more confident presentation is that powerful sense that shows up, and then others receive it. So us gaining our ability to be able to release our energy to the space, let ourselves be felt, to show up in a way where, the intention that we have within us can be received by a horse. Without having that receiving state, it means your horse is not really taking you on. And generally, if a horse is still reaching for you all the time, it means that there's an unmet need around space and they don't necessarily feel you. So horses will reach for us. And that's why I say, horses reaching for us or even nipping. Nipping is not a horse's behavior. It's an expression that we are not having a clear conversation around receiving state, because the horse is looking for that connection and we're not giving it to them. So then getting after the behavior, okay, sure, get through that moment, but you need to recognize that a horse has to feel you. And if they don't feel you, you are not giving them something they structurally need in their communication, their herd dynamic. And that's what I'm looking for. So then when they receive me, it's almost like they can take your energy on. And so then slowly the horse starts to act like you. Like, your presence and your energy, they can become calm because they're taking on your feel, which is very natural to them. Again, we see that in the herds. You put a certain lead horse out in the pen. I have my big gray horse. He's probably the most experienced horse we have on the place, and he's just this big stoic power. And any herd he goes in, everything settles. He doesn't hardly act on it, and then you pull him out of there and they start jockeying around again. And all of a sudden, the next horse on the totem pole is a little bit less confident, but now the herd's stirred up all the time. So leadership is about being able to, receiving state is really about what are you giving off, and recognizing the power of that. And I think we can recognize that for ourselves in life. What you're giving off is going to have some value, the way your tone comes out, the way you say it, the feel that's in your words. Uh, so yeah, I think being aware of receiving state means you have to be considerate of your energy. You have to be mindful of how it's leaving your body. And then the question is the horse taking it on? And if they are, you'll start seeing an obvious change in that interaction.
So would you say that receiving state is a part of leadership? Do you kind
Yes,
of fold it under that umbrella, or
100%.
so
Yeah.
so let me ask you this. If you are I'm pretty interested in, I'm actually fleshing out a course on building rapport.
Mm,
And that's one of those things that I know you and I would have to do. You go to some event or clinic or something, and you get handed a horse that you've never dealt with before, and
hmm
you go right into working them or doing something with them. I would imagine my approach to that may be a little more dominance based than yours is.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you view establishing that rapport? Do you have some checklist or a few specific things you're going to do or that you are looking for? Or do you have that organized in a four
Yeah.
bullet
So I
point presentation or
Yeah,
no?
yeah, good question. Um, when I first look at a horse, I kind of talk about the three needs that I prioritize, and it's mind, space, and pressure. And the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of get a sense of, so a mind horse would be a horse that's very mentally engaged in their world. Often would be herd bound. Their mind is leaving their body all the time as a sense of self-preservation. Um, just really busy thinkers. A pressure horse is a horse that's more reactive to their world. They're seeing things and they're more worried, very sensitive, and their sensitivities have drawn to their self-preservation. And then a space horse is a horse that's really engaging with you. They're in your space, talking to you, nibbling on your coat. They generally absorb the world, so they're super calm. They make horrible arena horses because they get bored so fast, and they would get sour and maybe sticky to your legs. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of get a general analysis of the horse I'm dealing with. And then I want to help kind of get a bearing on what we need to be talking to based on the kind of horse you've got. Um, and then to recognize the problem solving based on any one of those styles. Now you can break that down too linear. Every horse is all of them, but they're in different kind of categories. So the first thing I want to do is that. And if I can give people that, now they have a reference. So I do a lot of work in my website regarding, just the analysis of the horse. And um, so once you have a sense of that, that gives you a platform to start from. And then, yeah, I'm going to start engaging space. And a lot of the ways I'm going to engage space, and I find that people need to sort this out, is that if people are going to get into the horse too fast, so you and I might be able to step into a horse and get a change really quick, but most people, that any engagement of space for them is it's conflict, and they don't want conflict. So the only way they've ever thought about really using energy or seeing someone do it was when they were being aggressive or throwing energy out there. So we lump it in with aggression. So then, we step in and we're using our space a little more, and right away that's conflict. And they don't want conflict. They didn't get horses to have more conflicts. So what I often will do is just start talking about feeling space, and just trying to stand and sense what you're giving off and what is the horse interacting, and trying to read the energy, like feel what's happening, and trying to build some relationship around that. So with pressure horses, I want pressure horses to learn how to control space by softening and by bringing their mind back so that they can control pressure by involving themselves. With a mind horse, you need to be able to not talk to their body first. You need to be able to connect to their thoughts. So if I ask a question and their ears are over here, I want to release when I see their ears come back. They need to sometimes see that you see what they see and recognize that you have a calmness to share. And then space horses, yeah, with a space horse, they're not going to be worried about stuff, but they're going to be all over you. So gaining the competency to give off an energy, and that's where space horses, I talk about receiving state a lot, is that you got to get to a place where you can feel them, for them to be calm. And that's generally what motivates people, is to recognize that what you're trying to do is meet that need. And if you can meet the need, then they can become calm. So it's not aggression, it's not dominance. This isn't an argumentative conversation. You are providing something your horse needs to feel safe. So with a little bit of conversation, it kind of starts transforming thinking styles. And then we figure out what the need is. And then generally what I try to do is I'll try to step in and demonstrate that. And then I'll smear the person in and out, trying to get them to feel it. When I did a work with Dewey Freeman, he does a lot of work with proximity. So then, like standing beside a person, and I've recognized sometimes I'll do that where I'm going to get them right into the space and I'm going to do it, and they're going to be like right beside me so they can feel that. And that's actually a scientific thing where they get to kind of glean into your energy and feel it, and then you transmit it and let them out. And so, yeah, it's kind of a lot of information in a short period of time, but hopefully that makes sense.
Well, it leads me to a few other questions. So like I think what you're talking about with the space horse, that would be where I would often use that example of the wife and the anniversary dinner in the restaurant, and
Mm-hmm.
where I want
Yep.
her to learn to create a bubble. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I don't want her actually mad when she does it,
That's
but
right.
I find a lot of times we have to provoke that in the beginning, and then you can kind of, I would say, fake it. Like I
Yeah.
can put this
Totally.
energy out there, but I don't actually experience the emotion that might create it in
Yeah.
the beginning, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that ties in, like you're talking about, being able to bring your green tools into the yellow.
Mm-hmm.
I can work the hairy edge in a trickier situation with a horse with pressure because I'm actually still in my totally calm, sane mindset. I'm not, my RPMs haven't revved up, even though the horses might have, so I
Right.
can quit when I need to,
Mm-hmm.
and not get sucked into an emotional tirade or something
Yeah.
like that, whichever emotion it may be. So
100%.
there was another question I had that I was trying to bring about with that, and I think it's probably gone now. Hmm. Well, maybe it will come back to me in a little bit later uh, spot or something. So one thing that we talked about earlier was kind of the concentration of riding and getting into a Zen state. So
Mm-hmm.
when you are working a horse, let's say you're just working a horse, no crowd, no microphone, you don't have to explain to someone else. You get to actually just work the horse.
Mm-hmm.
Are you very agenda driven there? And I have these 3 steps that I need to go through and so forth, or are you more Zen state, go with the flow, take it minute by minute and kind of just whatever? I don't like, I find I can zone out very easily when I work horses if I don't have to talk to people or something like that. I could almost 45 minutes has passed and almost like
Mm-hmm.
driving a car. I don't really know what
Yeah.
I did. I just all of a sudden I'm down the road 20 miles. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how I got here, but it was a good
Mm-hmm.
ride, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You have that happen a lot?
Um, yeah, I think it depends on what state I go into it with. But, for all my horses, we're almost every horse we have, my goal would be to get them feeling pretty safe, to be able to I always have convictions for myself. I'd like to ride everything bridleless. I'd like to ride everything bareback. I'd also like to compete on them. So then I kind of have this conviction of relationship and athleticism and resilience kind of like processing in my mind. And when I find if I'm going, if I'm cowboying and you're out you're looking for cows or you're covering ground, I can find I get into that state a little more often where I'm just zoning out and just letting it be and you're just kind of getting lost in the space. There's times where I'll just go and lay on one of my horse's backs out in the pasture and you just find yourself just lost in time. I think the greatest challenge in training, as we're developing horses for different competitive mediums, is to stay focused on the goal without losing the ability to stay in connection. Because it gets easier the more you feel pushed to a deadline to start wanting to kind of get in on a horse stronger. And I know you would know that feeling just training cutting horses. There's always that challenge. So I think that's kind of the big piece for me is that I'm constantly thinking about trying to develop them, but on the same hand, not sacrificing them. And that sometimes means they're not ready to go show, and sometimes it means that I need to change my timeline a bit. But the more mindful I can become that, well, excuse me. Uh, so that conviction causes me to have a goal, but keep it in balance, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. So it kind of keeps you online
Mhm.
in a different way.
Yeah, I think it does. It's I know just what you're talking about. We definitely are, peaking horses towards certain shows. The pressure goes up, but at least all the people that I work for, they were pretty good about cycling down afterwards, let the
Mm-hmm.
horse decompress, so
Mm-hmm.
so it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't we're just going to sacrifice this one. I
Yeah.
never really saw that. A lot of the things that get claimed about the performance horse world, I mean, I was in it for a long time. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
see near as much as of that kind of stuff as what people talk about. Like I've heard the same guy a couple times talking about people starting reining colts at 15 months old.
Mm-hmm.
I've no, I mean, I can't imagine where that's happening,
Yeah.
but anyway,
Well, I
people can.
think that people love to talk about when they want to have an idea, they generally will use those extremes as their defense mechanism. And that's that
Yeah.
judgment thing again, right? Now I have this ability to categorize that entire industry and say anything that's being done like that is negative. And I think that's a problem with the lack of experience. Then the question is how many reining trainers do you actually know? How many cow horse trainers do like are you actually connected to anybody, or have you just saw something on Facebook that you didn't like? And what it's
Yeah.
that it goes back to that judgment thing, right? And I think that's again the more you're around, the more you learn. Yeah, there's some bad ones in
Yeah.
everything, you know, and there's some really good ones in everything. And I always say that you want to understand something, interpret it through a master's hands and don't even whip your eye to anybody else, you know.
I always find I like having the hard conversations with someone you might have a little bit of
Mm,
conflict or controversy,
mm,
or you don't see things quite the same way. But at the same time, it's never fair to compare the best example of my side to the worst example of your side.
yeah.
Like that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Well, y'all are all starting colts at 15 months. What? Where the hell are you getting that from?
Yeah,
That's not,
right.
another trend out there, since we kind of are talking about that, is the hanging out with your horse thing. And you and I both now outed ourselves. I don't know if you knew that, Josh, but we've outed ourselves as people who will just go hang out with our horse on occasion.
Mm,
In fact, I don't do that as much as I need to, and I need to make more time to do that. At the same time, I would say there is a trend now of doing that for connection. So I'm gonna take a lawn
mm,
chair and put it in the paddock and read a book
mhm,
while my horse totally ignores me and grazes over here on the
mhm.
side. I have kind of felt kind of like you're talking about, there's different horses, different needs that they have that aren't being met, or so forth. I think one of the things we are weakest in right now is paying attention to where our horse's attention is. I find a
Mhm.
ton of people, the biggest problem they have is that they don't have their horse's attention, and they don't recognize when they do or don't, and they don't
Yeah.
have any skills to get it if they don't. And they're not, I think focusing specifically on that is really important. So kind of one of the worries I have, knowing that most people are in that spot, is that they're going into the paddocks to hang out with their horse thinking they're building some connection, and I fear what they're actually doing is reinforcing a horse ignoring them and not giving them their attention when they are out there within their space. So do you
Yeah.
have any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I don't know. I just think that, you talked about me and like a person looking at their pro, looking at someone else's negative, and I feel like I call it the pro con insight, but that's the way arguments stay in their power is I'm looking at my pro and I will never talk about my con, and someone else is looking at my conversation. They're looking at me, but they're looking at my con, but they're defending their pro, and I'm looking at their con. And every perspective has a pro and a con, and that's the way arguments stay. So the industry needed to move to more connected ideas. And I think what I like about this is like some people, their lives have been really tough and or they just had a long day at work and they want to go sit in the chair and just be around their horse. And it's not even about training. It's not even about focus. It's nothing. Just you just want to sit here. So go sit in your chair. But don't then discredit someone who's trying to go and compete because their moment is them trying to do that. Nor should the person trying to compete look at the person sitting in their chair and say, well, you don't do anything. It doesn't freaking matter what anybody else wants to do. Their moment is their moment and they'll find their balance of need. And I feel like that's the biggest struggle is that we then think doing this and having our horse put their head on our head and going for a nap means we have amazing connection. Well, you do in that moment, and that doesn't discredit anything else, but it doesn't have to be a judgment against other things. So I think there's some balance in that approach and being able to be mindful of what your horse is doing and how connected they are to you. And, can you bring yourself back to that place? I think it's beautiful, but it doesn't have to discredit the person who's then also, and I feel like this is where the most discredit comes is when people are trying to do hard things and it's a friggin' mess. because they're now realizing what they don't have. And then there's judgment upon that mess. And that's the man in the arena piece for me. Like, people are trying to do hard things and then judged when the people judging are not also doing those hard things. So I feel like if we could just also all recognize that in different seasons, we need different things. And if you're going through a massively hard part of life, don't go train your horse. Just go sit with them and let the horse's energy make you feel better. And I don't think that's negative. I think that's something the horse can, feel good about, because you just sit with them and you're just so thankful to be there, and they can feel that. And then in other moments of life, you're out there trying to succeed and all you're doing is falling on your head and screwing it all up. It doesn't mean you're abusive. It means you're trying to find legs to do something new. And I feel like if there could just be a real respect and a reverence for the stages that everybody's at and the place that they're trying to do, then it's all good. But it's what I think the problem is it's the judgment to try to defend, and that's that pro con insight, right? Like, don't look at someone else's con and only focus on your pro. And if you're able to, like, every single argument would end if you say to me, well, Josh, this, and I say, yeah, you're kind of right. You're supposed to push up against that, Josh. No, you're not. Well, why would I? You're right. That is a good point. And if we could both say that, like, I'm trying to sit with my horse, well, you're not competing. You know what? You're right. Well, you're not focusing on relationship. Yeah, you know what? You're right. Well, while I'm trying to get competitive, I'm really trying to push my edges. And yeah, I haven't been spending enough time in just hanging out with my horses. You're not wrong. There's just no arguments. So anyways, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what it leads me to.
No, it's, I guess I view it kind of this way. The hanging out with the horse thing is probably more for me than the horse. So I'm not discrediting that it ever has an importance to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you get to a certain spot with a horse, when things are good and they're balanced, then you really do have a relationship. Then I don't think there's any harm in that at all.
Right.
If your horse is a pest that needs a lot more leadership from you, and he's knocking your drink over, and then hanging out with him probably isn't leading to better outcomes. It's more of a what's appropriate with what horse at what time or stage, sort of thing. And I think it could lead to almost a desensitizing sort of state, which could be a good thing. Like if I have a fairly wild horse that fears people, and just me being within a 60-foot proximity is too much pressure, then me sitting out there reading a book and doing nothing and not responding to him, probably would be pretty darn beneficial. So it just all sort of depends on what we've got going on and so forth.
And even if that person has had a horrible day, maybe they need to sit there and read a book, and I feel like that's where the balance comes, right? It's just, I always jokingly say we just need to read the room, like you need to read the room on your own deal. And, if you have some goals, but yet you just need to chill out, then that's a great idea. I just think the romanticizing of certain places at the judgment of other places is our problem, because we found something good in it. Now we got to judge the other stuff. And I think that's just like, just enjoy your own place. If that's where you want to be, then be there. And don't let that mean you have to judge someone else that's doing something different, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, a good bit of your stuff, I don't know that I've ever heard you talk about this. We've never had this conversation, but you really seem to come at things with what I would call a mental health sort of a balance. So have you studied the mental health field very much, and are you consciously doing that, or is that just part of oozing out of your essence, whether you intend for it to or not?
Yeah. I just think that what's gone on in you, and that's been my experience watching folks, is that your energy just gets impacted by what you've been through and your character. And what your horse is reading is they're reading your energy, and then people get triggered by things, and then that changes their energy because of how it impacts them. So then what I've noticed for myself is the more work I've done on me, the more lenses I've changed, and the more, you do some therapy and you do some learning and you do some growing. Well, now I have a different lens that I'm interpreting the world from, and that just changes my energy. So then it's almost like you can't kind of separate those two. Is you can use technique and understanding, but you're still going to be triggered by stuff because of what's going on in you that you haven't taken care of. So for me, there's this balance of, just recognizing that if you really want to get there, you really want to get to that place, you're going to have to go and kind of work through your own wounds, so to speak, so that you have more available, so you're not so triggered, and I feel like that's where a lot of people are, is that we want really good relationships, but if we don't kind of do our own work, all you're doing is we're replicating the problem with the next relationship. And I feel like that's a lot of what's happening. And that's the same with the horses. I don't change my judgment of them. I'm still being triggered by the same things. So then I keep repeating the same problems. So this is a little bit of the problem, I would say, an industry thing where, people get inspired. Let's say they get inspired by me and they're just like, oh man, Josh's work. Well, then I give them my work, and then they get to they get to the point where they're getting challenged. And now they're like, well, I don't know if I really like that. And then they see a Daniel Dauphin ad come up, and it's like, well, I've got your answers and I can help you. And then all of a sudden, whoop, they're jumping over to your deal because it sounds appealing. Well, what's going to happen is it's not going to be long, and your work's going to challenge their edges. And then all of a sudden, they're going to see the next ad pop up. So I see a lot of people who surfacely bounce around because there isn't an ability to say, you know what, I need to take stock of what's happening inside me, and I need to go do that work. And now for some people, that's therapy, and I'm not your answer. I'm not a therapist. I like to try to focus on empowerment, where I'm accessing the energy people have available and helping them utilize it. And if you're not able, then therapy is the answer, man. Like, we need to go do the work. And I try to look at that. Like, there's a big movement in that in the rodeo world right now of just, it's mental, doing the work is strength, like it's good to do the work. You're not weak because you got to go and do the work. Mm-hmm. And I like that a lot. But I just feel like that's the cycle of the marketing system is you get, I talk about the industry has the potential to train the professional amateur, which is over giving techniques. I'm giving techniques for every problem. And if you have a problem, I'll give you another technique, rather than teaching the heart center of what it means to be with horses. And that takes a little more time because you got to do the work and you got to own the base and you got to live it. And then all of a sudden, when you have that lens, well, now all the techniques kind of make sense and you might even come up with them yourself. But by just giving people fish, we're not necessarily really deepening the industry. And so then that's the part for me. It's like, yeah, I know you want an answer here, but if we don't go ahead and do the work, you're just going to keep needing answers. And that's not creating more depth in our industry. So yeah, that's a kind of a soapbox, but kind of a thing for me.
No, I agree. Sometimes knowing what the right questions are is a lot more important than knowing what the right answers are. Mm-hmm. Right. That's a different deal. Yeah. And I almost feel like talking with another clinician or pro, that's one of the way you size them up. If they have a quick and easy answer for everything and the answer isn't pretty regularly, it depends, then I'm going to suspect the depth of knowledge it's not a real deep pool over there. It's a little shallower than what it might be if everything is that cut and dry and black and white and simple for you. So
yeah, totally 100% agree. I just feel like, yeah, it's one of those things where I just desire to help people truly grow, and I think through horses we become better people. And when you can see that not everything's about me, but not everything's about the horse, and you can start reading the consistent patterns that you get out of horses and out of relationships, well, that should cause me to have to go do some of my own work. That's not about anybody else. But that doesn't mean also that my horse doesn't have an accountability in this. And so I'm not a proponent of, everything's my fault. I don't think that's valuable. But it's also not all the horse's fault. Relationships are, two having to come together strong. So
yeah. Well, why don't you tell us about some of the offerings that you have? You got some online courses and things, and I know you're doing some monthly webinars, and also someone were interested in finding out more about you.
Yeah, you betcha. I've got my own website. That's always the challenge of teaching clinics, is that, you get to be somewhat successful in that space, and then you can't see people very often. So then seeing folks once a year, it's just not enough. So then I started a website. So I have a community online where I have tons of videos and learning progressions that people have access to. And the whole goal for that was is that as we're able to do clinics and then have that as a learning platform for people to go back and forth with. And then on my site we meet monthly to answer questions and kind of keep people rolling. And that's been pretty good. It's a way that makes me feel good about actually doing clinics because I'm not just dumping some information and then heading out of town and not supporting people's learning. So that's been really good for me. And then now I'm doing also a work with Noel Floyd, which has been really great. Noel loves my style of how I look at things, and I feel like I'm kind of a meeting of two worlds, which is trying to blend relationship into competition and competition into relationship, and how do we live in that space in a healthy way. And Noel has really appreciated that approach. So I've been doing some courses with Noel Floyd on NF Plus and trying to support what they're doing. And yeah, just really loving how she's trying to bridge that competition and relationship gap. So makes me feel like I fit in really well with that. I'm always trying to recognize my lane and kind of try to maximize my efficiency in my lane. So that's been really fun. So those are kind of the two big things. Obviously we just released our clinic schedule for next year, and that's filled right up. And then trying to yeah, continue to do stuff with Noel and moving into the States a little bit through that. And then just doing my best to keep my own community going online. And then yeah, riding my own horses with my kids and having fun there as well.
So you mentioned there a little bit about um, what I would call maybe cross training or interdisciplinary work. So Noel does mostly jumping, right? Or
Yes, she has done a lot more. That's kind of where she comes from. Her
Mhm.
world is a little more jumping, but she's not just that. Her platform is just trying to take excellent, most of that's right. I struggled to see how I fit in the beginning because most of the people she has on there are Olympians. Like it's a very high class group of people, and she's just trying to pull from excellence. And that's what I've learned is she's just trying to find people that are really good at what they're doing. But her focus is just trying to support people. She just wants to be able to develop a plan that allows people to get connected to really good whatever. So her expanse is moving kind of all over, but just trying to give people the support to grow.
so that's kind of what I was getting at. Again, I'm thinking about the 16-year-old kid with the cups, where when you recognize
Mm-hmm. Right.
badassery somewhere, it doesn't much matter what the discipline is. I found when I first started doing clinics, um, I had very few English riders. They
Mm-hmm.
would look at me and I talk like a hick, and then got a cutting horse background, and I guess the assumption was that they couldn't learn anything from me. I had a few that would call and ask if they could come to a clinic, like if I accepted English
Mm-hmm.
riders, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, you're on a horse, it's got four legs. We could do something here,
Yeah.
there's nothing to that. So I really do appreciate it. Seems like our world in the performance side of things has gotten more and more and more specialized. The
Mm-hmm.
bloodlines, every
Mm-hmm.
part of it has gotten super specialized. And I think that comes at a cost. And I like the
I agree.
idea of people cross training and going and riding with somebody that's of a totally different deal. And I think a whole lot of that needs to happen. It's definitely to the benefit of us and to the horses. And just as we have pros and cons, if your particular discipline has this huge con and you are willing to acknowledge it, probably an awful lot of good for you to go ride with another discipline or a type that has that con figured out and has
Mm-hmm.
not, they've turned it into one of their pros. Um, I see sometimes equipment and things that people are using in different spots, and it's just kind of like, y'all really like there's enough information over here
Mm-hmm.
of how that's not beneficial to you. You really should cross that line, come check this
Yeah.
out, and it'd be a whole paradigm shift for your sport if y'all would just stop
Mm-hmm.
doing that. Um,
I've actually found that happening with my daughter in the barrel racing world, because so she's trying to use my principles and getting horses to be balanced, because that's really all my priority is. And I think that's why it cross disciplines so fast, is because I'm caring about what's going on between your horse's ears, and I'm caring about how well they can use their body. And that's it. And then your discipline comes after we've got those pillars established. And then all of a sudden, like you say, now the problems you were experiencing are no longer happening, right? Because that base is just the reason that you were having the problem has been diminished. So if we can get to where that's happening, so then to watch my daughter barrel racing, that's an industry that has a lot of variety in how things are schooled, we'll say. And then for her to use, get in the mind, get in the body, and then putting that to a pattern is giving her a little niche that she, that others don't have, which has been kind of fun to watch. So that's kind of where I found people have utilized my work, because they're taking that into their industry and then having some success with it, because there's others are not kind of so willing to reach out, and then they're all doing the same thing, hoping for a different outcome.
Yeah. I kind of feel like I don't really ever use the term natural horsemanship, but a lot of us people assume we're painted with that brush, and then that brings certain expectations and assumptions and feelings that may or may not be true,
Yeah, that's right.
um, for sure.
That's a pretty diverse basket, that whole word. There's
Yeah.
a lot of range in that. I jokingly say the last thing I want my horse to do is be natural.
Yeah, arsenic's 100% natural too, isn't it?
That's right.
There are some buzzwords that go through the industry that just they become red flags that when you hear someone using that, you're like, okay, I don't want to be in this conversation. Let me see how I can slip off over here, right?
That's right.
Um, well, I don't have a whole lot else on here to ask you about. Is there anything you want to get into that I haven't thought of, or that you want to promote or hit a little harder, or anything like that?
No, I feel like we've talked about a lot of points. I think that's been yeah, a fun conversation. We've been able to touch some unique edges, and some edges that are, I think we're both feeling in the industry. That's always fun to be able to kind of bring light to for people. Um, yeah, I appreciate you asking me some questions about what I'm doing, and if folks are interested in what I'm doing, how they can check in on that. And no, I've really enjoyed our time together.
Yeah, and like you said, I truly hope we get to ride together somewhere down the road. I know I would enjoy that quite a bit. That would be and I know if we do, probably it's going to be a professional thing where we don't just get to go goof off and
Hmm.
play around. But I hope
Yeah,
at some point we get to make that happen. Um,
yeah,
and I do appreciate you being willing to have a conversation with me about some of the things that could stand to change and we could stand to improve upon.
yeah,
Not trying to focus on the negatives there, but
yeah.
I've been feeling a big stewardship of the
Hmm.
industry kind of a
Yep.
thing that I really
Hmm.
fear for where we're headed right now, and
Hmm.
whether it's still going to be around in 15 or 20 years at all.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I'm trying to have more of these kind of candid conversations, and I definitely I felt like I knew you pretty well before, but I feel like I know you even a little more so
Yeah.
after this conversation. So,
Yeah, I
um,
appreciate that too. And honestly, I think it's funny how we swing, and then there's this whole like, whoa, will this stay? And I just think, I recognize that those swings are demonstrate their lack of balance as time goes
mhm.
on, but they're always a little scary. Just like the whole COVID thing is gonna end the world, and it has its impact, and then everybody finds a balance. And so I kind of feel that too with this. I don't think the horse industry is going anywhere. I think we just need to get good at representing it, and finding that balance, and we will go on.
Well, my fear, and I don't know if y'all are experiencing the same thing in Canada, but like ending horse slaughter was the big thing that changed our industry, and
Hmm.
we've lost 40% of the horses in the United States in the last 17 years.
Hmm.
And that's not a 14% decline. That's 4 out of 10 gone.
Hmm.
So that's the trend, and it's still going down. It hasn't found bottom yet.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's the part of it that I'm fearful over. I know a
Mm-hmm.
pretty decent number of pros that are out of business, had to go do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's always a cycle of that, but
Mm-hmm.
it
Sure.
just, there are fewer horses out there right
Mm-hmm.
now by a significant margin than what there used to be.
Mm-hmm. Crazy.
And it hasn't necessarily taken out the bottom third of lower level horses like you might think. There seem to be
Mm-hmm.
just as many lower level horses. It's been a sideways chop of every
Right.
level rather than just culling off of the bottom like you might think. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I am fearful, but hopefully needlessly so.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Huh.
classics never go out of style. I know what you mean. Try to stay down the middle and don't be pulled so much by the newest, latest, greatest thing that nobody will remember in 5 years, and just keep doing
Yeah.
what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of my motto right there.
Well,
Yeah.
we will have links to Josh's website and his social media stuff in the show notes, so y'all will be able to reach out to him. And then I'll also link to Noel Floyd, I guess. I don't know how to. Is that a website I would send them to that has your courses on it, Josh, or how does that?
Yep. NoelFloyd.com.
Okay.
And there'll be access from there. You betcha.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.